Great. Wow, great audience. So, as Michael said, I tried to get the fire pit here, a little table of scotch, and it just didn't work out, I guess. So, but this is
almost canceled when he said there was no scotch.
But this is supposed to be just kind of a general discussion with about 180 of our closest friends, okay? First of all, Jose, I wanted to thank you for coming out. I know the time that you commit to doing these things and sharing the information that the HHS is doing and the transformation that the CIO shop and the IT, health IT in particular for us has really been transforming. So one of the topics that I'd like to start with is obviously Accelerate. There's been quite a bit of discussion in other forums. You've given some other interviews about that. But it's the first blockchain-based program in the federal government that actually got an authority to operate. And its core node that supports the business and service layers adheres to the FAR. So it's got a lot of advantages going at it from that aspect, GSA's Category Management Initiative. I just want you to tell me and the group here a little bit more about the acquisition portal and your results at HHS.
Yeah, sure. So one thing about Accelerate that folks don't realize or just kind of dismiss is the fact that it really is infrastructure. So we're ingesting data, we're curating data, and we're creating mechanisms to share data, right? And that's really what the investment in Accelerate is. The first data set that we actually started to use that infrastructure for was acquisition data. And so we built microservices that are a representation of the planning aspects of the acquisition lifecycle. And I do have an update. Last Friday, we actually awarded our first contract using a neural network that we actually built off of Accelerate. That neural network did a cluster analysis of about 10 years worth of contract spend. It read through terms and conditions and prices paid. And it gave us visibility into kind of price discrepancy across the portfolio. I'm not going to tell you the company, but we negotiated a deal with a company, and we're going to save $30 million over 5 years. It's about a 52.25% discount off of the rate that we were currently paying. We'll generate savings immediately in year one. That deal in and of itself more than pays for the investment that we made in Accelerate. And that was really kind of the idea behind Accelerate. Now, the blockchain piece of Accelerate, which we think is really interesting, we were just using it as an attestation layer. But we think that as we scale it and people start to want more access to the data, we start to create a behavioral record of the data sets that folks are accessing that's immutable. And then we think we can actually tokenize and start to nudge different behaviors across any portfolio. And so we've made a down payment on this infrastructure so that we can ingest, curate, and share data. We have a series of business services so we can transform unstructured, all open source. We can transform unstructured data sets into machine-readable data. And we think we have the ability to be really disruptive, really transformational. I never want to be disruptive. Really transformational from the perspective of how we deliver services. So that's the update. We have another deal that we are working on that we expect to complete sometime in April. And you know how the acquisition life cycle is. I mean, we may not hit our target in April, but we think there's over a $30 million savings opportunity there based on the insight that we have to the data set using HHS Accelerate. So it's going well. We're about 2 weeks behind the schedule that we set, not for the contract awards, but just for the development aspects of Accelerate. It actually no longer sits under me as the CIO, although I do have a large say in how it's implemented due to some federal laws and my own personal interest. But it's going well.
Well, I think in this sense, disruptive from an individual persona with disruptive technologies and stuff that's been talked about, I think is obviously a positive. Are there other ways that HHS is using blockchain for improvement of processes?
Yeah, I mean, there are use cases in HHS that are leveraging blockchain at the FDA. But I think more importantly, and somebody asked me about this the other day, it's the FDA RAPID program for anybody that's wondering. But I think more importantly, blockchain is infrastructure. It's not sexy. but it provides for an ability to do business differently. And it's not the entire technology stack. I mean, everybody just wants to talk about the blockchain. As I said before, it's just a thin layer of our tech stack, and we're using it as an attestation layer now, and we're using it so that we can nudge and encourage decentralized behavior in the future. There's a number of use cases that we see that could benefit the agency leveraging blockchain. As the CIO, I see. But it's things that will happen behind the scenes, and I don't know that it'll be something that everybody understands that we're actually doing. And I think that's the nature of blockchain technology. But from a return on investment perspective, we think that it is significant, and we think we've proven it with this first deal that we awarded last Friday.
Well, to the dismay of your staff, we were talking back. I'd like to go off script real quick with a question. Given my background trying to grow up as a clinician and learn more about acquisition and get the levels of certification to help when I was still in uniform, we talked about your background in procurement and the acquisition and procurement advances that HHS is making for its innovative movement. I want to give you a little bit of time to talk about those advances and the good work that's been going on from HHS at that.
Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, if you're buying technology, it's less about what you know. It's less about knowing every detail about how the technology functions and more about structuring a deal that will incentivize industry partners to actually deliver something of value and be interested in your program. And so if you look at what we've done with HHS Accelerate and what we're trying to do with some of the other programs, what we did is we went to the market and we said, look, I want to spend $150,000 on a proof. Now, if I went out and bought licenses to do what we did on our proof, it probably would have cost me $1 million. And there's no guarantee that it would actually work or drive any level of change. But I went and I spent $150,000. I did a proof with a small company. It becomes great past performance for that small company. It allowed me to test something and we determined that it would work. It allowed me to test a hypothesis that we believed in. And if you actually look at what we're doing next, we're then taking that model and we're saying, look, HHS Accelerate is ATO'd. The boundaries ATO'd, the way we want to do business is ATO'd, and now we want to actually scale it at an enterprise level. The infrastructure in particular, right? The infrastructure in particular, we don't care what application actually runs off the top of it. So we've gone to the market and said, look, if you're a large company that's investing 20% of revenue in R&D because you're scared that you're going to get bought out by a competitor or you're going to be extinct, come bid on this business opportunity. Because while it may be a drop in the bucket in the billions of dollars of revenue that you generate every year, this will be the first one in the U.S. federal government to actually deliver this type of infrastructure, and it becomes a selling point for you when you go and sell your product sets globally. So what we've tried to do is incentivize companies to kind of offer us value through the acquisition lifecycle. And I think that's the way that you actually approach industry if you want to generate as much value as possible. The neural network, the recurrent neural network that we built. Sure, could I go out and do business with a large company that has that capability? Yes, but it would cost a significant amount of money. What if I go to a university, or what if I go to a small business that pulls in the university students and actually tests a recurrent neural network with an unstructured data set that I have? I give them access, I put them behind my firewall, and I let them prove my hypothesis. It's great past performance for that small business, great experience for those students. I get a quick understanding if it's going to work. I learn how to implement a TensorFlow capability, and then I turn around to the market and I say, hey, is there anybody out there that can help me scale this at an enterprise level? We think this is worthwhile in terms of an investment. That's how you fundamentally transform and change government, and that's the approach we've been taking. And that's why we've been able to do things so quickly. And I'm fine with the risk. I mean, I've done presentations like this, and I'm not picking on the front table, but you're right in front of me. I've done presentations like this and had people roll their eyes at the table like, that'll never work.
They weren't rolling.
And by the way, I won't say their name, but I remember the person's name. I remember where they worked. And every single time I see them, I tell them, I remember you rolling your eyes. All right? Merciless. Absolutely merciless with that person. He is not here today. But
he was, but we had to ask him.
But you have to be willing to take that risk. You have to be willing to take that risk, and I'm fine with it. I'm absolutely fine with the risk, and I'm absolutely fine with the tension it creates.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me segue that a little bit. Knowing the audience that we had, I thought that was going to be a good topic. So it's been a little bit more than a year now since the president actually signed the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Making Act. So how has HHS approached the Evidence Act within your business model?
Yeah, so I think that for those of you that know our ASPE organization, they have done a ton of work on this. And they deserve a lot of credit for the work that they've done. And so Evidence Act really has kind of three pillars to it, right? And I have a very specific interest in one pillar. So from one level, there's this discussion around privacy. When you interact with an app like Facebook or Instagram, you agree to share your data with them. And then that app is going to share that information with 3 or 4 different parties. That's their revenue model, and that's how they generate revenue. So when we think about sharing the health data within HHS, we have to understand the privacy implications, and do people actually understand what they're sharing? So there's a policy piece focused on that. The other leg of it is there is a large economic impact that sharing this data can have. If you look at the impact that GPS has had from an application perspective on the U.S. economy, it has been significant and created entirely new industries. And when you think about the fact that we have data on 100 million Americans, and Evidence Act says that you should share everything unless you make a decision internally not to share it, there's an economic boon from a policy perspective to actually sharing data if you can control policy. But the third piece, and the piece that interests me most, and this is the piece where the role of the CIO really becomes involved, is how do you do that? How do you create an API ecosystem to actually share data at scale across the department the size of HHS and that's as decentralized as HHS? How do you create the right security controls to actually share that data? Because the decisions that we make in terms of that API ecosystem, in terms of the security requirements that we want to impose upon the way that we do business, right? That's going to drive investment in private industry, and that's going to fundamentally change the way those applications are developed. So those are kind of the three aspects of Evidence Act. I would say we're at the point where we're having the discussion around the API ecosystem, how to think about that. That may not be a complex problem. I bet 10 of you could stand up right now and say, yeah, we know how to solve that problem. Have you solved that problem for an organization that has data on 100 million people? That's where the problem becomes very large.
Transfer to scope.
When you think about the scope of it. And then remember that whatever we articulate through solicitations and through policy as it relates to how we want to do business is going to have a huge impact on how that industry forms. But the CIO has never created policy historically. The CIO is there to ensure that the data that we're sharing is secure. The decisions you make and how you secure the data and manage that API ecosystem essentially will drive policy in the private sector marketplace that uses that data. So we're trying to start to think about it in those terms. And anybody that wants to come by and have that discussion, I'm very interested in that discussion and learning as much as I can about that, because I don't think that that's something that somebody that's internally focused, that's operationally focused, has had to really think about before at that scale.
And the sensitivity from a PHI perspective that people tend to be a little bit more restrictive on versus
I think
general PII.
Let's talk about the economic piece, but let's just talk about the economic piece. I'm going to pull the string on it for 1 second. So if you think about it, what does AI need to be developed? It needs data. And then you're going to build an algorithm, you're going to build a machine learning capability, and you need a bunch of data for it to learn. Well, what does that lead to? That leads to the development of new chips that can efficiently run those algorithms. You're talking about something that fundamentally will change industry. And I know of an adversary, and you can read this in The Economist, okay? And I know of an adversary that has the best facial recognition technology on the face of the earth. What does that give them? 1, they steal data as much as they can. 2, they label it. Who do they pay to label it? Very low-cost laborers in a very poor province within their country that just sit there all day and click on the noses of people and pictures. It trains their algorithm to actually understand facial recognition better, and that knowledge helps them make a chipset that can most efficiently execute that work. You're fundamentally working downstream and transforming the way that industry functions. So, when we start to think about sharing data, through a series of open APIs, we have to understand the economic impact that can have. And for everybody in this room that's interested in AI, be really interested in data labeling. Because nobody in the United States at least in the places I've been, nobody's ever talking about data labeling. But labeling data, I was in Las Vegas, this is a little sidebar, but I was in Las Vegas for CES. and the Uber driver, the Lyft driver, was complaining about the fact that the rates that she get paid have been lowered significantly, and she was saying $6 or $7. And I almost blurted this out, but my wife has told me to think before I talk. That's why you get married. And I almost blurted out, like, you're a cheap data labeling activity for Uber and Lyft, right? And there needs to be a robust conversation, in particular as it in health IT, around data labeling, because that's really what's going to drive competitive advantage.
Don't blurt that until you get to your destination.
Yeah, I didn't say it.
So for the final question, we again talked backstage a little bit. So we brought up several innovative techniques with the advent of blockchain, AI, RPA, machine learning, cloud, and other emerging technologies. How do you foresee change management within the HHS?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. From a change management perspective, look, tension exists. If you're going to change something, it's going to create tension. And I actually read this the other day. I was reading about the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah. And I'm not an expert or a physicist, but I was reading about it, and the comment that the physics professor was making is that life is the most efficient form of energy, of moving energy. And so, and that creates like some level of tension and chaos, and you just have to accept that. So if you want to change something and you're going to put energy into it, right? You're going to move matter, you're going to heat, you are going to create tension. And if you sit there and you're afraid of tension, you're never going to change anything. So you have to accept the fact that tension will exist. You have to accept the fact that entropy will occur, that there will be significant amount of disorder. And how do you align incentives so that you can, in changing something and putting energy into change something, you can drive a certain outcome? And then you also have to accept the fact that there will be other residual outcomes that occur just because it's an efficient way for disorder to resolve itself, right? And I'm fine with that. And if you can. But if anybody that thinks of themselves as a change leader, just accept the fact that tension will occur and live with it. And you can't develop consensus on change. Anytime you're taking your energy away from one thing and you're focusing it on something else, you're not going to be able to develop consensus around that. And you just have to accept that fact. And I think that our approach to change management has been to create an experience for our workforce. So, I know we're out of time, but
we're fine.
So here's the example. I remember playing played basketball many years ago when I was thinner, and I remember every single play from a game-winning shot that a guy on our team made. I can tell you the exact play. It was a high screen and roll. The guy jumped on the high side of the screen. I flipped to the other side. They jammed the screener, and he ended up hitting a game-winning shot. Why? Because I experienced it. Because I was in the moment. Somebody wasn't telling me what to do. Somebody wasn't talking to me. I was in a situation. I was a part of that play. I can remember the numbers of the jersey. I can remember what hand he got on the ball. I can remember every aspect of it because I experienced it. So if you're going to try and drive change, accept the fact that tension will occur between two parties and try to actually create an experience for the folks that are involved in that change. And that's how you can actually solidify and get change to actually be digested within a large organization. And if you're not comfortable with tension, then don't try to change anything, because you're really just you're gonna spin your wheels.
Well, the only constant is change,
And change comes with conflict. Anybody that's married knows that.
Well, I think you guys are on a great path with your change management, and you at the helm as the leadership. So thank you very much for taking the time and sitting down and chatting as our closure. And I promise next time, little scotch.
Okay.
All right.
Deal. Thanks, guys.